Good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome. My name is Greg Beeton. I lead on the Defra project for Brown&Co. We're very pleased to have a good number of people here with us tonight, some of whom I'm sure have been on our previous two webinars. This is the third in our series, and we also have a good number of new participants, so everybody's most welcome. So, as per the usual format, I'm going to lead the webinar for about the next 45 to 50 minutes. We are going to record the webinar, so it is available to watch afterwards, and we'll send everybody the link for that. I am going to be joined by a couple of colleagues tonight who are going to be presenting and adding more detail around our woodland, our agri-environmental and our habitats options. So just the format for today, we'll do a few intro slides on the project so everybody's up to speed, a quick recap on the options that we've talked about in previous webinars, and we will then go into more detail on the specifics of today, which is around environmental strategies, which includes woodland and habitats and agri-environmental schemes and greenhouse gas footprints. As always, we would like to encourage as many questions as possible, and please do use the Q&A button at the bottom or the top of your screen to ask those questions. We will answer all the questions either live or in a follow-up afterwards. We'll also be adding some documents on the chat function as well, that gives a little bit more detail that people can download or pick up later as required. So just to the next slide really just sets the scene for the project. It's a Defra project. It's running for the next 2.5 years. This is the third phase of the project. We at Brown&Co have delivered the pilot and the interim phase. We're working across all of England, and the idea is to support farmers in a wide range of ways as we leave the European Union and as BPS, which is probably the biggest impact on most farming businesses, declines. So it's looking at the impacts, but also the opportunities of the new schemes and new initiatives that are emerging. Next slide, please. So just to sort of follow up really with why certainly I and others think this is of real interest, and the timing is really pertinent. We've got lots of changes in policy coming. I think most of them are pretty set. We're still waiting for real clarity on where Elms is going, but I think the mood music seems to be that it's going to remain. We've then got external shocks that have come in that nobody could have predicted. We all know the effect of the war in Ukraine and everything else associated with that, as well as general uncertainty around markets. Then there's the usual stuff in families, in farming businesses, the culture of farming. The usual stuff around succession planning and thinking about what happens next. And on top of that, we've got a changing climate. So all of those come together, and we believe the project offers an opportunity to talk about those in relation to your own farming business with some professional experienced advisors. So the project runs from now until the end of March 25, so the next 2.5 years, and there's a whole element of choice in it. We put together those choices based on, next slide, who we worked with in the project to date. So we know that of the 750 farmers we worked with in the previous phase, these are spread across all of England. We know we work with a considerable number of tenants. The majority of land that we worked with was tenanted in some way or form. We work with a lot of livestock farmers, a lot of mixed farmers, but also specific livestock farmers, and as well as the mix of horticulture and general cropping and arable. And about a third of the farmers were also older, and the older generation, I think, could be challenged most with the changes that are upon us. And there are 3 or 4 main points that we pulled out of the previous project that's really informed how we've designed our support this time. So we know that 86% of farmers have told us that they need to make changes to their business, but only about 34% are actually doing anything about it at the moment. So extra help and support to try and give confidence, reduce risk in making change is something this project can offer. We know, and it's probably obvious, that BPS makes up a big proportion of profits for most businesses. We also know that 80% of farmers are thinking about planning succession, and that might be handing down to a newer generation, it might be changing tenancy, it might be exiting the sector, it might be entering into some collaborative agreements. We also know that quite a lot of farmers believe they have opportunities for land and buildings, and there's a lot of interest in the environmental schemes, whether it be stewardship, sustainable farming incentive, or the other emerging options. So all of those have really formed the interventions we're offering in this new project for the next 2.5 years. And the next slide really sets out, this slide really sets out the choice that we're offering. And there are a choice of 7 different interventions with some sub-interventions there. So it's around choice and hopefully should accommodate pretty much every farming business out there. Before we come on to that, we'll just go back to the slide on Brown&Co and just to say who we are. So we operate across all of England. Our base offices are mainly sort of in the eastern part of the UK, but we operate through the whole country. And we've also got a partner in this project in Devon, enables us to deliver in the southwest. The project is not in Wales or in Scotland, and last time we delivered across the whole of the country. And the bit that I think is important that we want to get across the message from Brown&Co is that we have professionals in-house across all disciplines. So land agents, environmentalists, agriculturalists and planners. And so we're able to offer a range. And it also means that we can talk across the desk with our colleagues and work out what the best solutions are with farmers. So if we move on to the interventions, so just a quick run through of the 7 offers we have. The first one is the general business review that many people took up in the last round of the project. This is on offer again, designed to give an overview and some signposts of what might come next with more detail. The second is around finances. So this is around looking at budgeting, business planning, particularly looking at managing the present and looking at up-to-date information to plan right now and next year across enterprises, across cropping, and particularly around cash. And we know that cash is really important at the moment with interest rates going up, or overdraft facilities being challenged with higher levels of input costs. We're also looking as well at budgeting, partial budgeting for change in the future, thinking about new enterprises and diversifications. So this one and the next one, which is around technology adoption and collaboration, we actually covered both of these in detail in our previous webinar, and we'll just put in the chat now the link to that and the initial webinar when we set all of these out. So we then move on to the next set of interventions, which is around land and property. This is going to be covered in detail in our webinar in December, I think the 12th of December. And again, we'll put a timeline for this in the chat now. And this is going to be looking really to de-risk any sort of steps around planning and consents and thinking about the opportunity of land, buildings and existing planning consents. And this will be delivered by our professional planning colleagues and land agents. The next 2, so these are really the subjects of tonight. So I want to go into detail on this one, which is around sort of natural capital environment. The next is on greenhouse gas footprinting. Again, we'll cover that right now. And then the last in our current series is around offering support to the tenant sector. And whilst all of the previous interventions will be, I'm sure, of interest and of value to tenants, this is also looking at the particular challenges that tenants are facing. And this is our next webinar on the, it's on the 23rd of November, when we will have a panel of our land agents, and we will be looking to answer questions and discuss some of these challenges, particularly pertinent in the light of the ROC review. The tenants and Kate Rock will be part of our panel that evening. So moving on to tonight, and we are going to focus on environmental strategies, and also greenhouse gas footprinting. And the first part of our session is looking more detailed at natural capital. And I'm going to bring in Lottie Hill, who's sitting in our Norwich office, who's going to kick off with our overall framework for looking at environmental strategies. Lottie, your floor is yours.
Excellent. Good evening, all. So as Greg has just kind of outlined all the different interventions that we are offering, and the rest of today is having a little bit more information on the natural capital and greenhouse gas footprinting. So first of all, an overview on the environmental strategy. Excellent. So it's such a large topic, natural capital environmental strategy. We've essentially decided that we are going to be offering 3 sub-interventions. The first is habitat assessments. The second is advice on woodland creation opportunities. And the third is an overview on all the different agri-environmental schemes that are applicable and what they could be doing on your farm. We all start out exactly the same way with these. So the first thing that we do is once you've signed up and chosen that you want to do environmental strategy intervention, we have a look at mapping. And then we talk to you about your ambition within that and decide which of the interventions that you wish to do, which has very different outputs. You'll have a report at the end and all kind of overview what else is available. So next slide, please. So the mapping element is essential for us to get an idea of what you potentially have on your farm before we come to visit it. And also to allow us to embrace as many different opportunities for connectivity. So using a variety of different tools, and some of them you might have come across before, so using Magic Maps, the Authority Commission Map Browser, or the Land app, we'll be looking at the different potential designations on the farm. So whether that's international sites such as Ramsar sites, or UK-based, so triple SI, so sites of special scientific interest, local and national nature reserves, as well as any scheduling for the historic environment, such as scheduled monuments or shine features. It's having a look that maybe on your farm that you might have some priority habitat that's already existing, such as some grassland and floodplain, or you might be next to it. And that kind of gives us an idea of the proximity of what skills and what kind of habitat improvement you could be offered. So yeah, every farm has a go at this, and we'll produce some maps in your report before we come and visit. Next slide, please. So in order to decide kind of which of the sub-interventions that you want as well, it's good having a think about what your ambition is. It might be, and this is kind of one of the most hot topics, is replacing your BPS income. You can look at potentially replacing about 50% of your BPS income through different agri-environmental schemes that are available. You might, in fact, be really interesting in promoting a particular species on your land. So you might be an area of turtle doves, and that's something that you want to focus and promote, or the biodiversity. You might also be interested in kind of identifying the areas of less productive land and seeing if you can generate an income from there. So having a think of your ambition before you decide on a sub intervention is quite important, but it's one of the things that when you do sign up, you will be passed through to a member of the staff, and they will be able to kind of advise you on which intervention or sub intervention you'll find most applicable. We'll move on to the next one now, which is the habitat assessment. So it's becoming increasingly important to be aware of what you've got on your farm. This might be in order to allow yourself to improve the habitat you've got with different private and public revenue incomes. So one of the approaches that we're looking at is a boots on the ground approach of using the UK habitat assessment to come out on farm and have a look what you've got. We'll have conversations with people, but once we get there, it might be worth between the farmer and, let's say, myself, if I'm coming out, we'll discuss whether potentially we want to focus on the grassland. You've got some hectares of grassland out of production that you could look at improving. So using UK habitat assessment, we'll decide what kind of grassland it is and the baseline that you've got there. Next slide, please. Once you've got that baseline, we can assess for habitat. So this is kind of seeing whether it fits into, for example, non-acid grassland or acid grasslands, semi-species rich grassland. And this allows us to potentially input it into the biodiversity metric 3.1. Now, the biodiversity metric 3.1 is a tool to ascertain your biodiversity units that could be available, or biodiversity net gain. And the reason that biodiversity net gain could be important is from 2023 onwards, all developments, you have to have a 10% uplift in biodiversity on the development that you're doing. So ideally that's going to be done on site, but if that's not possible, it can be found off site. If you have already worked out what habitat you have, and I worked out ways that you can enhance that, you can then offer biodiversity units to be sold to fulfill the requirements of developments. If you don't know what you've got, you're going to be a little bit behind that, and someone else locally might be able to do that. You could focus with biodiversity net gain potentially on arable land, but I think it's better to start with what you've got, potentially looking at the grassland and looking at ways of improving that so you're not taking anything else out of production. So once we've done our baseline and we've worked out potentially there might be some biodiversity units on, there are also other things we can do with this habitat assessment. Next slide, please. So this could be as simple as looking at going into a new elm scheme or higher tier scheme, knowing what habitats you've got and what stewardship options might be most suitable for it. It could be understanding the biodiversity on your farm in general. You might particularly really like encouraging lapwing onto your farm and find out ways of encouraging different habitats for that, and maybe wetting some grass and for them to breed. And other kind of more private incomes could be carbon offsetting and sequestration on the farm, or as I previously mentioned, positioning yourself for biodiversity net gain. So the idea of this habitat assessment is it's going to have a quick assessment of what you've got, and we can make recommendations on how to improve that. And then going forward, whether that's biodiversity net gain, offsetting, or just having a better idea of what you've got, that should really help position you in a stronger natural capital position. One other of the sub-interventions that we're doing is looking at woodland creation. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Will Higgins now, who's going to kind of go through the different opportunities and what we plan to do when we come out and see you there.
Thanks, Lottie. Can I just pick up on a couple of points you made, I think, which was very helpful. So just around the BPS, and I think, I think there has been maybe some thought that environmental schemes will replace BPS. And I think our thinking is actually there's not going to be, or very rarely is going to be anything a single income stream that replaces BPS. And so I think that's why it's important to look at a range of different options. And that's what we're trying to put across here, because a portfolio of different income streams from natural capital will go some way, or maybe all the way, but there's not a quick win. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. You're not going to find one thing to replace your BPS income. You're going to have to look at a multitude of different options, diversification, natural capital. So the more informed you are about all the different options, the better the chance you can do. I've just seen there's a question as well in the chat going, how many biodiversity net gain units did your client sell this year? At the moment, because it's not a legislation, it doesn't come into 2023, these units aren't being sold as such. So until the market's open next year, that's not something that we will be able to do or answer, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
And I think to add to that as well, Lottie, I think there is some debate about the size of the market, because obviously the on-site accommodation of the 10% could be something that developers really pick up on and try and deliver. The counter to that is actually that on-site land is very valuable to put a house on, rather than potentially the biodiversity enhancement. And so there are some calculations and trade-offs there, and I think there are mixed views as to where that's going to go. So I think the next 6 to 9 months are going to be very instrumental in forming the size of this market. And the reason why we're really suggesting now is the time to start is because the value of those units are very much enhanced if your habitat is already preformed. So starting from scratch is not such a great place as something that is already there in some way or form. And that's because of the time element of delivering that enhanced habitat. That comes into the calculation.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, I jumped in then, but we'll now, thanks Lottie, we'll hand over to Will now on Woodland, and we'll come back. I think there's some more questions for you, Lottie, but we'll come back to those a bit later.
Perfect.
Thanks, Greg. Hi, everyone. So I'll start with just giving a bit of background to Brown&Co's experience in the field of woodland creation. So we're one of the largest project developers of the Woodland Carbon Guarantee government auction scheme, having secured over £6 million in carbon funding over the last 2 years. And that's ranging on projects from less than a hectare in size to over 200 hectares. And during this journey, we've discovered several sort of motivations in landowners planting woodland. And these range from the amenity value that they can provide around enhancing shoots to developing rural tourism diversifications. And many plant woodland to take marginal areas of land out of production and generate a guaranteed long-term income stream. Many landowners are also attracted to the remote management potential of carbon income, especially where the next generation aren't necessarily involved in the day-to-day running of the business. And historically, these motivations haven't been enough to incentivize any sort of large-scale woodland creation. But with the government net zero targets and direction of travel, much more funding is becoming available to fund woodland creation. And I'll come on to some of those funding streams in a minute. Next slide, please. So what is this intervention? So firstly, it's a viability review, looking at those screening checks mentioned on a previous slide, plus more woodland specific checks around archaeology, historic environment, water and flood risk and utilities, many of which are showstoppers, so need to be identified very early on. Secondly, it's an information sharing exercise, so informing you of the latest grants and carbon schemes available and how they interact with one another. As part of this, we'll also carry out Woodland Carbon Code carbon calculations, which take into account various site-specific factors around soil type, climate, rainfall, species yield class, to give an indication of how much carbon a woodland might sequester on your particular site or farm. And that's important because it's linked directly to carbon income. And we'll also calculate the potential grant funding that you might be able to secure to fund the capital cost of planting. And again, that's very much site specific. And the end result of this will be a partial budget that we'll prepare to calculate total change in profit, which can obviously be used to compare woodland creation against other land use options. Next slide, please. So just to give a few headline figures around the financials that support woodland creation, and these really come from two avenues. There's the carbon income, which based on £25 per carbon unit through the government auction process, equates to about £250 per hectare per year income to landowner. But as the voluntary market for carbon develops, there'll be opportunities for selling carbon for a higher price to private buyers. So that's only going to go up. In parallel to this is grant funding to cover the capital cost of planting, which covers the full cost, plus added lump sum payments once the woodland's planted. and they can add up to over £4,000 per hectare. So when put together, these funding streams really start to stack up and make woodland creation a lot more attractive than it historically has been. And under many of the current grant schemes, BPS can even be claimed on those areas planted with woodland. Thanks.
Just to chip in before we bring Lottie back in, Will, could you just clarify what we deliver in FFR, because there's a big process around woodland that ends up in grant securing. We're not going to go all that way. Tell us what farmers will get.
Basically, the end result of the intervention will be the farmer will fully understand the various grants and income streams, will know whether woodland's viable for his site from an EIA environmental perspective, and will be able to use these site-specific figures to compare against alternative income streams. In terms of the actual grant processes and application processes, will provide a roadmap and action plan on how these might be delivered, but they would fall outside of the scope of this intervention.
Okay. So I think that the theme there is that what we're providing in these interventions is enough information for farmers to understand and have choices and to be able to make decisions. They're all based around a day's input, and so as much preparation and information in advance really helps us be as effective as we can with our time. And that sort of expectation management and discussion with farmers and landowners is something that we think is really important as part of our engagement. Will, just before we go on to Lottie again, there's one question here that's come up for you I can see on the screen, which is how frequently do landowners, farmers get paid for woodland carbon?
So every 5 years, the woodland gets verified by the Soil Association or Organic Farmers and Growers. And at those 5-year intervals, a pool of carbon units are generated, and the landowner is free to sell those to whoever he wishes, whether it be to the government or private buyers.
Okay. Do you want to take the next question on fruit and nut trees now or later?
Yeah, so in terms of fruit and nut trees, a small proportion of these can be included in the species mix, but under the grant eligibility, it can't be on any sort of commercial basis. So just a small, less than 20% proportion can be fruit and nuts.
And that's part of the choice of species mix that needs to be put in for the carbon calculator and everything else.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, fine. Okay. Will, thank you very much. I'm sure there'll be more questions as we move on. Lottie, can we bring you back to try and give us some clarity around the rather complex agri-environmental scheme structure that we have at the moment?
Excellent. Hi all again. So as we know, there are quite a few agri-environmental schemes available at the moment. Should have all heard of environmental land management scheme, the sustainable farming incentive, countryside stewardship, landscape recovery, local nature recovery, ELS, HLS extensions. It can all be a little bit overwhelming to know which scheme is most applicable for you, which is going to generate the most amount of income. And essentially this sub-intervention is going to provide you the answers. So the most common schemes at the moment are the countryside stewardship scheme. We've got some ELS, so entry-level stewardship and high-level stewardship still running. And we also have the launch of the sustainable farming incentive. And the way that these all interact need to kind of work out to know what's best for the farm. So at the moment, one of the elements of this sub-intervention is comparing countryside stewardship, if you're already in it, and the sustainable farming incentive, and what you can kind of get out of both of them. So there is an overlap in some of the options and what they provide. And as the sustainable farming incentive, as it progresses in time, there are more standards that are going to become available. And we will produce a calculator comparing these. So it might be at the moment, there's the arable and horticultural soil standard. This doesn't overlap a huge amount with some countryside stewardship options. You can't get paid for the same area. in it, but you can apply for both. But it might be in a couple of years' time, you're really interested in putting your hedgerows into the hedgerow standard that's coming, and this won't be available within countryside stewardship, and it'll be working out which will pay you the best and what's the best going forward. So yeah, there's an overview when we come and visit on all the different agri-environmental schemes available and what might fit with your farming business best. One of the main ways that we're going to be doing this is through kind of a farm map. So next slide, please. So having a farm map is an increasingly important skill, especially when we look at the use of different stewardship options. When we come out, what we want to be doing is identifying areas of land that are suitable for stewardship and environmental options. It might be, say, a nectar mix is better placed in slightly smaller areas of farm, slightly harder to get to. Once they're established, they can normally be left for 5 years with cutting once a year, as opposed to regular interventions and management. And there's tends to be no minimum or maximum size of that. So nectar mixed and stewardship is very much an option, but I see going forward with the local nature recovery, nectar mix is going to be an option within that. It's an option within ELS, HLS, and it will still be very applicable. And having an idea where that sort of option is going to best fit your farm is going to help tie yourself between schemes. It might be that you're looking to improve organic matter, so you'd be looking at more multi-species ley or legume mix, and we can make recommendations on where that's best as well. So having an idea and a map where different stewardship options are shown to be most suitable is definitely a really useful tool for you to take away and have kind of a build of the potential natural capital items that you've got. So the next slide, please. So that's been a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the different sub-interventions that we're looking at offering. So whether that's the habitat assessment or the potential look at getting biodiversity net gain going forward and credits, looking at the woodland creation and the investment that you can get through the Woodland Carbon Code or these different agri-environmental schemes that are available. The idea of all of these is that you will be coming away with a report, but no matter which intervention you've chosen, there will be background information on the others that you haven't. So the idea is that you're coming away with a good kind of natural capital assessment of what you've got on the farm and ways of improving it. This might be an improvement that you're focusing more environmentally, trying to focus on a habitats, so heathland restoration, or it might be that you want to take a slightly more financial approach to it and really work out the ways of kind of offsetting your subsidy deduction. So yeah, hopefully that's a good overview on the environmental strategy intervention that we've got. Just checking on one of the questions that we've had through saying, like, I am in stewardship now, can I still enter SFI? Yes, you can. Again, not all of the options, countryside stewardship options, you can apply, but options such as cultivated area, you can be in a scheme and have one of the soil standard on as well. But yeah, that is something that is possible. So yeah, you can have funding for both at the same time. Excellent. So I think what we're going to be focusing on next, and Greg is going to take the lead on this, is having a look at the greenhouse gas intervention and how that footprinting is going to really help your business. So back over to Greg.
Thanks, Lottie. I think just to add on the environmental side of things, that I think this project and the duration over the next 2.5 years really offers, I think, really great flexibility in this area, because we know things are going to change. There's going to be emerging standards in SFI, will be much clearer on elm, and we're able to sort of tailor working with farmers as and when it best fits. So, book your place now, and it might be that when we hear more about the SFI standards, which might be, next spring, next summer, we don't know, we could then work with you at that point when we'll have a fuller portfolio of information to talk to you about. That also applies to other income streams. The utility companies, I'm sure, are going to be bringing out more water-related schemes as well, and they can all be fed into this this thinking around a strategy around environment and land for any particular holding. So I think Lottie, we see this is changing over time, and we can be agile to pick up as and what comes along. And I think there is a really good opportunity here for farmers to understand and produce a range of options to try and, as we said earlier, try and get back towards that ambition of covering as much BPS loss as possible.
Definitely, and as a company, we've got agri-environmental specialists, we've got specialists in woodland, so we're in a really strong position to, as soon as these updates are made, be able to get those out to everyone, and that can be reflected in reports that we're doing. So yeah, I think it's personally one of the better interventions, because agri-environmental and natural capital is my thing. But it is a great chance for you to have a better understanding of what you've got, and until you know what you've got, you don't know how to move forward.
Super, thanks. So we've talked through really sort of the basis of looking at environmental strategy, and part of it that we haven't talked about it within the main strategy, but I think it's sort of an emerging important part of, and likely to be of every business in the UK, whether you're in agriculture or not, is looking at greenhouse gas footprinting. Government ambition to be carbon net zero by 2050. And that's only going to be driven by the sum of lots of little parts, really, which is sort of all businesses having an ambition and a target to gradually reduce emissions and increase sequestration over time. So what we're offering here is basically to deliver a baseline greenhouse gas footprint to farms. We are going to use the Farm Carbon Toolkit as the platform. We've looked at a number of different toolkits online, and this is the one that we've chosen because we think it offers a great deal of flexibility, it's user-friendly, and we think it's something particularly that we can recast fairly easily, whole farm footprints, to understand the change of planned sort of emission reduction measures. So we like that, and that's why we've chosen it. So the idea of this is to produce a baseline, and then the really important part of the intervention is, once that's produced, then to talk with farmers about, okay, where are the easy wins? What are the measures that we can put in place or suggest, understand the trade-offs related to those, with an ambition to drive down the footprint over time. So who's it for? Well, we think it's potentially for everybody. I'll come back in a little bit to thinking about why do it. And there does seem to be an increasing interest and uptake. There's a little stat there on the bottom right hand side, which I think was a Defra produced survey, that it's 2/3 of farmers thought this was something that will be important, certainly in the near future. So we look at the next slide, please. So what do we need? And actually, producing the footprint initially is driven by data. And so it's trying to extract information on farm. A lot of it, relates to fuel use, relates to inputs for crops, it relates to livestock, handling of waste, sort of inventory and sort of assets on farm. And so it's trying to pick that data. The most effective way of getting it is from places like Gatekeeper or Muddy Boots, which will have a lot of crop records in. It's also part discussion with farmer on farm. Key to this is getting as much information as possible before we visit, because then we can put much more of a focus on saying, so what do we do with this? How might we be able to shift this and have a plan to reduce over time? So the right-hand side there, the diagram there really just is the main output, really, which the blue box looks at emissions. So these are carbon dioxide equivalent emissions, which is really from carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane. The green box represents offsets. So this is sequestration. Could be around woodland. It could be around soil carbon. Those are the big contributors. And then the right-hand box, the brown box, looks at the balance. And in this case, the balance is positive. So there's a net set of emissions on this farm. The bottom KPIs are ones that we produce and put in place. And in isolation, it probably doesn't mean a great deal, but the real value is to say, okay, how can we drive this down over time? And the next slide starts to pull out some of the discussions, and these we can replug back into the tool to see what the effect of change would be. So reducing emissions through tillage, reducing fuel use, nitrous oxide and fertilizer is a big one. Then thinking about removals through soils and biomass. We're not going to go into a great detail on soil carbon in this intervention, just because there's no scope for it, and because I think we're going to see quite a lot of change in that area in the next 6 to 12 months. We're heavily engaged in it, but what we can do is talk about how farmers might position themselves, how some of the actions here would be beneficial towards producing, positive impacts on soil carbon, which ultimately farmers may have the choice to sell. Overall, with greenhouse gas footprinting, I think the big question, is this something that's just an add-on and nice to know? And my response to that would be, actually, pretty much everything that will deliver an improvement in your greenhouse gas footprint will also deliver an improvement in your business efficiency. And I think the two go very much hand in hand. And this is just looking at it through this lens. But I think it's something that producing the baseline has lots of benefits. And I think increasingly we're already seeing companies like Arla, Morrison's asking for this or offering added value for produce when there is a footprint in place. And I think over time, we will see increasingly the supply chain asking for farmers to have a plan in place, a reduction plan in place, and that will help with market access in those supply chains. I can only see that getting more and more. Next slide, please. Is that the end? Yeah, okay. So there were, okay. I'm just looking at the questions that are coming in. Okay, so just on information required for the footprint, we have, a data sheet. Quite a lot of the information is quite similar to that you might require for doing an enterprise net margin, as an example, because a lot of it is driven by inputs, but it's something that we will supply in advance to help that production as much as possible. The second question I'll come back to later, or we'll reply to that afterwards when I can supply a little bit more detail, and we can just check out the details, because all the footprint tools are different. They will produce some different results, but the whole ambition is to move in the same direction. And I think the absolute detail, to me at this stage, is not that crucial. It's showing change over time. So just coming on to our last slide before we move on to Q&A. And this tries really to pull together where we are with our offer. And we are presenting, the Brown&Co interventions this time. There is quite a range, and there are overall interventions. There are also some smaller ones within. And if farmers are not really clear which ones they want to go for initially, that's absolutely no problem. Do talk to us. We can talk through, which ones might be most appropriate. So don't be afraid of, signing up and coming and talk to us. We can help support that journey. And there's also this element of time as well, that, not everything needs to happen initially, but we do, we would like to see people signing up so we can keep people informed. I mean, a good example is the changes in SFR and the like. We can keep people informed with that until we get to a point when the intervention is required. So registration, sign up, intervention choices. Our model is very much around meeting on farm. and it's face-to-face. That's our proven methodology that we believe produces the best results. There's a whole element of reporting with it as well around key performance indicators that we will talk through the farmer, and then there's follow-up and feedback over a period of time after the intervention. Okay, we've got a few questions. So just before I move on to the Q&A, the next webinars we have are on the 23rd of November when we're on tenants, and then December the 12th when we're looking at land and planning. We are also going to run a livestock specific webinar as well, because we do think that's important, because our feedback and findings from our last intervention were that considerable portion, half of our farmers had livestock, and so we think it's important to provide some specific support and a webinar on that, and we'll be doing that. If not before Christmas, it will be shortly after Christmas. Okay, let's have a look at any questions that we've got coming in. So just looking at some questions we've had in earlier, there's some live in the Q&A. So there's a question really about 3 interventions. I mean, this is something that we've been asked a few times, and we have the ability to offer more than one intervention to some farmers, not to all farmers. And so we're very interested in understanding where preferences are for farmers, and we can certainly offer a single intervention. If you want or think you might need more over time, we can certainly put that as part of the notes when you sign up with us, and then we can revisit that in the future. There is a chance that it could be possible, but we'll just have to see how the project works out. Will, there's a question for you here around Woodland, which you can see. Will you answer that one for us?
Yeah, so in terms of minimum planting areas for the woodland carbon, the minimum threshold associated with the capital grants for establishment are 1 hectare of total planting in 0.1 hectare blocks at least 20 metres wide. In terms of the Woodland Carbon Code and selling carbon units, there's no minimum area eligibility. However, due to the costs of validation and verification, for it to stack up financially, the project really wants to be at least 1 hectare in size in total.
Okay. So we've just got a couple more questions, I think. There's one on assessing habitats, which I think we answered earlier, Lottie. I don't know whether you want to add to that, but I think the advantage is to start early rather than waiting. But I think that one's been answered. And I think there's one final question that we'll throw in here, which is around, should we be looking at stewardship next year or waiting for elm? I don't know, Lottie, if you're there to answer that one, otherwise I'll answer that one.
Yep, I'm here. At the moment, there's countryside stewardship. Next year is the last year of applying. It's a 5-year scheme. It's guaranteed income for 5 years. And you have the options once one of the environmental land management schemes are up and running properly, you can exit your countryside stewardship scheme and go into it. I think it's far better to kind of go with the countryside stewardship, better the devil you know than don't. Take advantage of that and wait to see what happens with, for example, the local nature recovery. That is meant to be up and running by 2024 with pilots 2023. Personally, I feel like they're going to be running a little bit behind schedule. So I wouldn't want anyone to kind of wait for something to appear when it's going to be running late. So yeah, definitely I would look at applying for a countryside stewardship scheme next year, utilising all the capital items that are within it as well. and then taking the opportunity to transfer to or create a new environmental land management scheme when it comes, but then you've got the opportunity to weigh up the financial differences between them as well and see which one is best.
Great, thanks Lottie. I think we've got time probably for one, maybe two more questions. There's one that's just come in about existing woodland, which is one we get asked quite a lot. We can probably all have a go at that. Lottie or Will, who wants to take that one?
I mean, at the moment, there isn't a huge amount of funding for existing unkept woodland. There is a hope with one of the sustainable farming standards that is going to be on-farm woodland, in which I think from a pilot, you were looking at about £39 a hectare. Obviously, those payment rates are going to change. So that should, when that standard is released, 2023, 2024, there should be payment for that. Other ways of receiving financial help with looking after woodland at the moment is through a hire to countryside stewardship. That's only really advisable if you've got more than 10 hectares, and you have to have a woodland management plan that's approved by the Authority Commission to go through to that. So there is some support out there, not as much as there should be, and that is definitely something that hopefully the government are acting on going forward. The difficulty about existing woodland, and especially with kind of carbon sequestration and that sort of thing, is the government have already taken those trees into budget for the carbon sequestration of the UK. So they really are looking for additional areas as opposed to what's already existing.
There were rumours of Forestry Commission working on a woodland carbon code for existing woodland, but that's very difficult to look at the additionality from management change, and I think it's on the difficult part at the moment, but maybe we can feedback more on that if we find out more from our Forestry Commission colleagues. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up now. We have some questions from our first session that we're going to just stick in the chat now, that cover some of the general points around the project. And they should be downloadable. If anybody wants any of those, please let us know. So finally, just to say that we've got details on this slide at the top of how to sign up. Hopefully you can see them, the email address and telephone number, and please do come back to us with any questions you may have, and we will be very happy to run through them with you, talk through all of our options, and look forward to working with as many people as possible in this very interesting project that has got a lot of flexibility and a lot of choices, which we're very excited about. So Lottie, thank you very much. Will, thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing as many people as possible in our next webinar. Thank you.